we're gonna change everything every day?
Yes. I made a list, sugar.
Why?
Welcome to Decoding TV's conversation about The Bear. I'm David Chen here with Patrick Klepek. So The Bear, Season 3, all episodes are available now. Patrick Klepek and I have seen the first 3. We're going to start with some overall thoughts on the show, and we will be following it up later with a conversation in a couple weeks about the entire season of The Bear. But let's start with overall thoughts on the show so far. Patrick Klepek, how do the first 3 episodes of The Bear Season 3 strike you? Are they a worthy follow-up to Season 2 of the show?
I don't know yet. Episode 1 is one of those transfixing pieces of drama I've probably ever witnessed on television. And yet, 3 episodes in, I don't know what the plot of this season is yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I worry, with the rumors that they shot 2 seasons back to back, there is a bit of let's go over the same trauma these characters have already been through before. But man, is the music and editing and everything beautiful, and it kind of papers over what I worry might end up being a slightly paper thin plotting, at least so far this season.
I gotta say, I feel almost identically to everything you just said. Like episode 1 of the show, Season 3, is really good. And worth checking out. And we'll talk about exactly what happens in that episode momentarily. But overall, I am very concerned about the show, I would say. I think that the show feels like it's spinning its wheels and is afraid to make too many changes to its formula, right? Like, we already kind of understand the milieu, the vibes of the show. And I feel like the show is terrified of pushing these characters forward and moving the plot forward in any significant way. But that's just based off the first 3 episodes. You know, maybe like the show is going to change dramatically. What we've seen so far, though, the beats that we've seen from previous seasons are just repeating over and over again. And that's not great. It's not encouraging to me for a show that whose Season 2 I loved, right? And I assume you feel the same way, right?
Absolutely. Like this is like one of the best, like those 2 seasons together. Some of the highs are the highest highs I've experienced watching television in recent years. And as a collective, like seasons 1 and 2 are, honestly, masterpieces. Obviously they have their faults, but like just a broadly wonderful show that I'm with you. I worry is getting a little aimless as it has to find a path forward, and it seems afraid to plot a course.
So let's talk about some of the stuff that happens in these episodes. We're going to discuss episodes 1, 2, and 3 in detail. Episode 1 entitled Tomorrow, episode 2 entitled Next, episode 3 entitled Doors. I do have to say, I was a little bit surprised at like how dependent, these episodes are on like the very end of the last season. Like, they really want you to have the confrontation that happened at the end of last season fresh in your mind to understand like what the dynamics are. But I mean, one of the things about the show that continues to be great is, as you said, Patrick Klepek, on a technical level, The Bear is very strong, right? And episode 1 shows that. There is a lot of shallow depth of field, really beautiful editing. In the case of episode 1, gorgeous music. I was watching this episode 1 tomorrow, and I was thinking to myself, man, this sounds a lot like Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross's score from The Social Network.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm getting some Social Network tingles from this. And then, of course, in the end credits, music by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. So there was a reason why I felt that way. But episode 1 is essentially a tone poem where it shows not only some events from the aftermath of Season 2's finale, but also many of the events leading up to the events of Season 1 in the show. Where you learn about Carmy's history, his backstory, some of the things that he had gone through to become the chef that he is today. And when we texted about this, Patrick Klepek, in preparation for this, you said episode 1 is basically an artistic experiment. And when I heard that, I was like, this sounds like it could be infuriating to me. And you're like, no, it's beautiful. And I watched it, and I at first was a little bit frustrated by it, but then as it went on, firstly, I was impressed with like just the logistics of it. Like, they got all the people from like last season to come back, or if not come back, because I don't know exactly what the production schedule was, like do more scenes than we saw in season 2.
Yeah, it's unclear. Like, are they being clever and reusing is the wrong term, but like repurposing footage that was shot for those episodes in a way that feels, whatever the case may be, it's really one of those shows. If you want to understand what editing does to something, because editing often is transparent. Like, you only notice it when it's bad. You rarely really appreciate it when it's good. And there's obviously a lot that goes into making the first episode, I think, special and interesting. But editing is the first part of that. Like, it is just like a truly exceptional work in terms of telling a narrative through editing.
Yeah. So we see like Olivia Colman come back, Academy Award winner Olivia Colman. We see Will Poulter. Alan Sepinwall at RollingStone.com did a great article where he like literally runs down like what period of time every scene is from, so you can recognize, because it like cuts back and forth between all these different moments in time. And if you're not really caught up on like what uniform he's wearing in each aspect of his life, you might get lost in this. But regardless of that, whether you can keep up or not, I think it's a really effective episode. And the thing that really struck me was like when you go to a restaurant, you eat a nice meal, and what you don't see, you see what the chef puts in front of you. What you don't see is the thousands of meals that the chef had to make prior to that meal, right? Like, you don't see all the work that that chef put into honing their craft and making themselves better and experimenting with things that failed and so on and so forth. And what episode 1 of The Bear does is it like helps to convey the enormity of time to you, like how much time somebody needs to work, all the indignities they need to suffer, the injuries they need to suffer. I felt like that's the thing that really hit me about episode 1 and made episode 1 ultimately quite powerful, in my opinion. Patrick, any thoughts on how episode 1 did its thing?
Yeah, it's fascinating because it, on some level, it's emotionally situating you with what happened the previous season without previously on The Bear. Because it really is a show about emotions, and maybe ultimately that will be part of the show's downfall, as it tries to balance between like a traditional narrative structure that gives character arcs and like trying to convey an emotion throughout a lot of its episodes, and certainly cinematography. But I found that emotional journey like really, once you sort of understand sort of what the episode is going for, like it's not as simple as a clips episode. It doesn't feel like it's recycling what's come before, even though oddly enough, where we get to as the season progresses a bit feels a bit like we're recycling. So there's an irony in, I will defend that first episode for being an emotional expression of a place and time and not just a clips episode, but where we get with the season feels more like emotional clips as opposed to actual a progression of these characters and where they're at in their lives. And really, I found myself really swept up in an episode that I think is trying to encompass like the emotional state of Carmy and what has led him to this moment. And my problem really with where it goes from there is that feels like a ... But then where we get to in the season is sort of like a period. Like, nope, that's just where we are. Nowhere to go from here. And there's like a real journey that you go on as the audience, and you've watched the journey that Carmy's gone on. But then it feels kind of stuck in gear once we get to the actual season.
Well, let's talk about it, right? So like episode 1, a tone poem, an artistic experiment. It doesn't really move the narrative along very much, but neither do the first few episodes as a whole. Okay, Slate.com had a piece by Jack Hamilton entitled "The Bear is Not a Good Show."
Okay, I saw that. Refused to click it. And
wow.
I've written bait before too, bud.
Okay, well, Jack Hamilton makes some good points. I'm going to read a little bit from the article.
I should point out, I am emotionally reacting to the framing of the piece, as opposed to any actual criticism therein.
Right. The headline is designed for maximum inflammatory potential. You're less concerned with the actual insights or critiques, more like the framing, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
Because The Bear has had some good episodes and arguably has in the past been a great show.
Yes.
Okay, The Bear has now had 28 episodes, or roughly 14 hours of runtime, over which astonishingly little has happened. One restaurant has closed, a new one has opened. People yelled at each other, then made up, then yelled at each other some more. Characters have been faced with important decisions and have failed to make them. A brother's death has been rehashed via flashback more times than Thomas and Martha Wayne's. Even the show's acting, once such a strength, now feels mostly lifeless in one note, and surely isn't helped by the writer's steadfast refusal to develop the characters or the show's over-reliance on frenetically edited close-ups as a visual shorthand for emotional intensity. Most glaring are the ways in which the show's aimlessness has become purposefully embedded into both its content and form. The incessant use of flashbacks feels like a crutch to avoid characters or the show itself actually moving forward in any direction. Dribbling out details of a character's past like breadcrumbs is a hackish and tiresome device. Filling in backstory shouldn't be confused with character development. Multiple characters have become increasingly defined by their inability to make decisions. Leaving aside that this isn't a compelling trait, it also conveniently gives the show yet another way to avoid anything actually happening. And I gotta say, I agree with you about the inflammatory nature of the headline, but I agree with a lot of the insights in the piece. I think it's a little bit harsh, but what is extremely ironic about this season so far is at the end of season 2, Carmy kind of has a meltdown while in the freezer. And rather than realize, like, hey, maybe being obsessed with all this restaurant work to the exclusion of anything else isn't a good thing. Like, that's not the realization he has. Instead, he's like, I never shouldn't even have attempted to have a good, balanced life. My whole relationship with Claire was a complete waste of time. Like, that is the realization he has. And I think the audience is a little bit ahead of him because he's clearly on a bad path in the first few episodes. He's like, we're going to try new things. We can't repeat things. I'm going to scream at people. Like, that's the path he's on. And the audience, you or me, look at this and it's like, hey, that's bad. Like, don't do those things. Like, that's not a healthy lifestyle. And debatably, you should already know this after all the events of the first 2 seasons, right? Like, arguably. I know humans are complex and it's hard for them to change, but like we as the audience have now been through a lot with these characters theoretically and know that Carmy's on a bad path. But what's so ironic about this season is Carmy has this whole list of non-negotiables. We are not repeating the menu from night to night. There's this obsession with not repeating yourself, but there's massive cost that comes with not repeating himself, logistically, price, money-wise. And yet the show itself seems to be repeating itself. Like, the show is going over beats that Carmy is mad at Richie. Okay, like, we already did this in season 1. We already had this whole dynamic. Like, couldn't we deepen the relationship now that they're actually on like way better terms? Nope, they're yelling at each other again. And by the way, that's just not interesting for me to watch in general, no matter how character how interesting it is from a character development perspective. Grown men acting like children towards each other, that's just not like super interesting to watch, in my opinion. There's a reason most shows don't have that go on for an extended period of time. It's because it sucks to watch. So I just think there's like this anxiety in the show about like repeating yourself, and the show itself is like, maybe the creators are like, oh, I can't repeat myself, but then they made the show about that, and in doing so have ended up repeating themselves. I don't know, Patrick, is any of this resonating? What do you think?
No, it is, and that's certainly how I've felt, and I think part of what's happening in response to this season is something I worried about at the end of the second season, which was how long can they keep this up? Which is like, how long can you continue to find excuses to keep people in this restaurant
in an unhealthy state too,
in an unhealthy state. And because it's an ensemble show where like the best elements are often when these characters are playing off one another and they can't seem to find a new note to hit. And that's fine if you conceived of it as a mini series where it's like, we've got a story to tell in its 2 seasons. It feels like this show, it didn't have a long-term story arc in mind. There's a little bit of figuring it out as we go along. And part of the illusion I think that's breaking is that it has such a strong look, like the editing, the music, like there's so much that grips you in the moment. But what's happening in season 3 is that once that moment is gone, you're not left with very much. And I think you were left with more alongside the transfixing aesthetic of the show in seasons 1 and 2. And maybe people feel that was more trick than substance. I really disagree. I think there was a lot of substance to the show that was leveraging aesthetic to tell a particular kind of story. I don't think it was a broadly an illusion across the entire series, but I do feel like we're running into that problem here where Carmy is stuck in the same gear, and I don't need him to become a good person. But what I need is, if he's stuck, if he is unable to progress or even regress, the characters around him should have a response to that. And so far, it feels like everyone is just sort of going along. And that doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like it follows the path of the character arcs that we were on in season 2. Richie especially. Like, Richie went from a bit side character, comedic relief, to one of the richest characters in the show as a result of like Forks, the episode from season 2. And it just feels like very little of that has transferred over to season 3. The idea that all these characters would just not push back against Carmy and these clearly fucking insane like ideas he has to run the restaurant, it doesn't strike me as plausible. It feels deeply weird, deeply repetitive, and there's only so long.
Carmy basically is becoming unraveled in these first few episodes. Right? He is obsessed with like driving himself further and higher in these first few episodes. In kind of a continue, like basically Claire being there at the end of the season 2 basically did nothing to him so far. Right now, maybe he's gonna realize, by the end of the season, oh, maybe I shouldn't treat everyone like shit. But it's like, we're already there, like Patrick, you and I, we're already there. Like, why are you treating everyone like shit? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it's just weird that you would have the season 2 end with him being like, oh, maybe I should be more obsessed with cooking, and then having a disastrous fallout from that happening. And then in season 3, his takeaway was, I was right to continue on the path that I was on at the end of season 2, right? That's just a weird
it's just
path for that character to take.
It is, and it feels like where we're headed with this season is him pushing everyone in his life to a breaking point where he is abandoned by everyone around. We're like, he was Carmy is a likable asshole who is supremely talented, and that is a toxic mixture of a person, but it's part of what made like those seasons work. Like you understood that he was a complete jerk, but also like there's so many other parts of him, and you understand why people are magnetically kind of attracted to be around him. That was increasingly less true by the end of season 2. And here again, it just strains credibility.
It's very unpleasant to be.
It's unpleasant, and it's fine if he's it's okay for him to be unpleasant. It's okay if Carmy turns out to be like a bad person who can't learn lessons. But it doesn't feel like that's the track we were on with the character. I don't think this is not a cynical show. It's an intense show. It's a show full of anxiety. It's a show full of sadness. But I don't think it's a particularly cynical show. And so that's where it's like, it just feels like we're elongating out an inevitable crash where he loses everyone around him and then has to go through a redemption arc. And
but we literally already did.
I know.
Like we've already done that arc already.
But Sid wants the Michelin star,
right?
Sort of. I mean, she's expressed that, but I don't know. That's not enough to explain to me why she's willing to put up with all of this crap. And it just feels like
arguably that was the arc of season 1 of the show is the relationship between Carmy and Sid, and Carmy treating Sid like shit, and then eventually like coming back around. And it's like, are they doomed to repeat this cycle forever? And if so, that's fine. But like, I don't know that it makes for particularly interesting watching. I will say that episode 3 of the show, called Doors, does bring the goods in terms of making you stressed out. Like, it does show how hard it is to run a restaurant and all the difficult things that happen. And sometimes the glass breaks, or sometimes you need to refire the steak that you made and you're 30 minutes late. And sometimes and this hyper kinetic editing style and, all this stuff, like the show is operating at the top of its game from a technical perspective. There is no question about that. But let me change the topic to one other thing, Patrick, which is, I think, another thing that I brought up in Decoding TV's review of season 2 of the show that I'm still kind of confused by is, to what extent, like what is the show's position on restaurant work? Here's my current read on it: is that their quest for the Michelin star, we are meant to want to root for them to get that, without Carmi losing his humanity. Like that's what I think the show is setting up. Is like, hey, getting the Michelin star is inherently good, and as long as you're not treating everyone like an asshole, we as the audience should be on Carmi's side and Sid's side to like get this Michelin star, right? That's fine, but if that is the message, that is disappointing to me, because what that leaves out is it doesn't interrogate at all, for example, the culture of restaurants, right? Like, and what is it about restaurants that allow people like Joel McHale's character, for instance, to be extremely verbally abusive and also wildly successful, right? In the video game world, this would be like making a show about like a video game developer and like not addressing crunch culture at all, right?
Or
addressing
or valorizing it, saying like actually, crunch is necessary to achieve greatness, which was the explanation in decades past for why are you not around your friends and family for the last 12 months of a video game project? Because because games don't come together into the last minute, and for order to be good, you have to put in the time, and putting in the time is what makes a masterpiece. And I think you are absolutely right that you can credibly get to this point in the show and not feel, because this is a show that, you know, makes food look extremely sexy.
Yes.
And it loves food. It loves, like, look at the way it shoots them cleaning up, like, the kitchenware.
Yeah,
and the
or
plates.
The plate.
Like, the way things are played. I mean, it is obsessed with the aesthetics of high-class food culture. And you can, I think, I'm with you. I think you can credibly get to this point and be like, I don't know what position the show is taking on that. And absent it taking a position, I am left to assume its position, which could be easily be interpreted as, this is all worth it. It is worth grinding yourself to the bone. You do have to be like a complete ass in order to be this good. And it's like a pretty like crummy message to be communicating in the show. And it feels at odds with all the other storylines that are happening with the characters, that is about like, how do you balance a talent and a passion with existing in the real world? Is it possible to be that good and also be a good person? And I think that was a central theme it was wrestling with for 2 seasons. And now I'm less sure if it understands, or is attempting to, like, I think the entire lack of an ability to move the characters forward is preventing the show from interrogating that any further. And a lack of interrogation then comes across as an endorsement.
Well, because the entire mission of the first 2 seasons is, let's take this subjoint and make it into like a Michelin star restaurant, which, like, first of all, is like kind of a weird mission to begin with. Like, that's just, it's like, you know, restaurants are a function of restaurant success is a function of demographics and which area of the city you're in and the people that frequent that area. And if there's a place that serves like $15 hoagies, it's not necessarily going to be successful once you charge $180 for a meal at that same location, right? And so it's like, but the show doesn't really delve into that, in my opinion. It doesn't really like dive into the complexities of that choice. The show also doesn't really depict a highly functional, positive work environment in general. The one exception to this, I would say, is like Richie's Forks restaurant that he was staging at in that episode. That was probably like a quote unquote best case scenario where like things seemed to function fine and no one was like wildly angry at each other. But that, even in that scenario, it was still a workplace that required complete and total dedication, right? In a way that like seemed all consuming. And so, but I don't see the show like interrogating that at all. Like, I think it's all very much like that the Forks restaurant where Richie's staging out. That's like the best case scenario that we are heading towards, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's the sense that I get, you know. And the question is just whether Carmi can achieve that, which is becoming a less and less interesting question as the episodes go on. So I don't know. what do people think? Do people think like the show has a position on this? Because in my opinion, getting a Michelin star restaurant, making an extremely successful high-end restaurant, those are not necessarily inherently noble things, in my opinion.
Or if you're just thinking from a storytelling perspective, like imagining the end of this show, whether it's season 3 or 4, and it's like everybody, like, I don't know how you get a Michelin star. Like, I don't know how is that a phone call? Do you get something in the mail? Does a person come out? Like, imagining the end of this show being like, and they got a Michelin star, like pan out to everyone waving as a drone shot goes away, like the bear, the end. Like, that is profoundly unsatisfying. Like, that's not what got me into this show. Like, I'm not even that much of a food person. I can appreciate good food, but it's not something I seek out. I know that we're a little bit different in that regard.
I am a food person, even I question like whether it's a good thing. You know, like I love eating at restaurants like The Bear as depicted in season 3. You know, like I've done it very frequently, and it's like, but even I'm like, you know, there's a lot of things sick about restaurant culture, right? That the show doesn't really do that much to interrogate.
And that's my issue is when I even try and think through, like, the show clearly didn't want to give up these characters, but what was the arc of this show? If you look back at the beginning, it was wrestling with the unexpected death of a close family member, and how do you extract closure from that loss? We're sort of well beyond that at this point, and I'm not saying they've necessarily like resolved all their feelings on how they should have handled that, what the reactions to that event were, but that was the core emotional sort of bomb of the show, is like, this guy dies. How do all these people deal with it? They work through their trauma and grief through this restaurant. But now we need a new goalpost. And I just don't think the show has established, what is that goal? Like, what are we working? What is the storytelling going in the direction
I mean, so far it feels like the Michelin star is the goalpost, right?
And
like, so far
that's boring.
Wow. First of all, I think it's possible we'll get to the end and they don't get the Michelin star, and Patrick Klepek will find the real Michelin star are the friends we made along the way. And I mean, that has been one of the show's strengths, is depicting the beauty and messiness and richness of these kind of family relationships, but also found family, right? That's when the show has operated at its highest and when it's been the most moving. And we'll probably get those things later on this season, right? Like, so far we haven't really, because Richie and Carmi are just screaming at each other all the time.
Yeah.
But like, I assume they're going to make up, and then we're going to get that family stuff, and it's going to hit right in the feels again. But yeah, and it wouldn't surprise me if the show ended in that place of like reaffirming, hey, boy, we've had some good times here, haven't we? You know, like, we didn't get the star, but boy, we've had some good times here. I will say, Patrick, that one of the most disturbing aspects of the show, to me, was the very end of episode 2. So episode 2 is entitled Next. And essentially, at the end of season 2, Marcus, the pastry chef, he gets like his cell phone starts blowing up. Because I think it's his mother that is in terrible state.
Yeah.
And has died by the time season 3 begins. And at the end of episode 2, he and Carmi have a talk, and he says, yeah, I couldn't be there with my mom when she died. And Carmi's like, I feel terrible about that. And then he says, actually, she would have wanted it this way. She wanted me to succeed and be with my friends. And I mean, maybe there's some people out there who like that really resonates with them, but like, for me, that makes no goddamn sense. Like, I'm just saying, you know, I don't feel particularly sentimental about my parents or anything like that. Like, there's many people I know who have much warmer relationship with their parents than me. But I would not feel good about being at work when my mom was dying. Like, that would just... that is not a story I could spin into a positive way. And the way the show makes that out of like, yeah, let's go get him. You know, like, it's okay that I wasn't with my mom when she died because she would have wanted us to get this Michelin star. I'm like, what is this really the direction the show's heading? Is this really where it wants to go? Patrick, what did you think of that scene? Am I like completely misreading this, right? Like, because I felt like we're supposed to get behind Marcus and Carmi and be like, yeah, go get him. Like, we're not supposed to find that incredibly disturbing what he says in that scene.
It's I mean, because the show in the previous season, like he's spending a lot of time with her, right? Like part of what's happening in season 2 is the extraordinary lengths he's going to spend time doing essentially a long goodbye to his mother, and how much he is sacrificing to do that long goodbye. And that's a balance between what is he offering his mother and trying to provide like comfort and dignity in her final moments, and whatever closure that can help provide him as he prepares for her to sort of pass on. So I don't know. I see your response to that,
but you didn't react in the same way. Yeah.
No. Yeah. I could find I could find a certain beauty in looking at it that way as someone that has kids, had a parent pass. I wasn't present for it. But I don't know. I didn't take that as cynically as you did, but I could change my mind on that reading of that scene, I think, depending on where this season goes. You know what I mean? Like, how does it depict this chase for the Michelin star? Like, what does it end up endorsing along the way? So I'm not quite that cynical about that read yet, but I reserve the right to change my mind and say retroactively that was heinous. But in the moment, I didn't find that reaction.
I just want to also clarify that I don't think it's inherently wrong or implausible for like a dying parent to want their child to be self-actualized and to be doing the things that make them happy, and, you know, to be where they want to be and spending time with people they want to spend time with, even in the absence of, you know, accompanying them as they journey on beyond this life. Like, there's nothing inherently wrong with that idea.
Yeah.
It's just kind of the way it played out in the show of like, oh yeah, no, don't worry, it's cool, totally cool that I was here when my mom was dying. Like that's kind of how it came across in the show, as opposed to, and obviously they kind of like deal with it in a more nuanced way in the at the top of episode 3, where they are at Marcus's mother's funeral, and he gives the whole speech, you know, like, and then we get more time to like fully explore that concept, you know, his relationship to his mom. So, but it just ties into this whole like, what is this show trying to say about the workaholic culture that is inherent in a lot of high performing restaurants? Does the show have anything interesting to say about it at all? Is my question, right? And I don't know,
because I am allergic to a lot of the way the show seems to tacitly endorse the positives of workaholic culture. As somebody that I go wildly out of my way, especially after I had kids, to like maintain a certain work-life balance where I want to be happy in my creative and work pursuits to the extent that I am capable of pulling that off, but not at the expense of like spending meaningful time with my family. And that's really hard to do. And if the show like ends up landing in a place where it's like, hey, in order to achieve there are things that I cannot do because I refuse to budge on that, right? Like, I've never written a book. I turn down book offers, like, because the only free time I have is my weekends. And I refuse to give up my weekends to have the prestige of writing a book. And maybe I can do that later in life when my kids are older. Right now, I refuse to give up that time. And I'm not sure that the show, it's totally fine to settle in a place where like, hey, there are certain things you can only achieve if you give up things along the way. That's accurate. That is correct. Like, I put a limit on what I'm creatively able to achieve because I say, I'm done at 5:30 at night so I can make dinner and spend time with my kids for the rest of the evening. I get that I'm giving up those hours, but I think the show, again, increasingly, it feels without a firmer handle on what it's saying, it ends up endorsing it in a really toxic way that is aided by like how astonishing the cinematography and editing and music selections are. Like, those all play a part in making this look cool.
It makes it very alluring, right? It's like the whole, but it's kind of like the whole Goodfellas thing of like, you know, is Goodfellas endorsing a life of crime? Obviously not. You know, where Henry Hill ends up is terrible. At the same time, boy, does it make being a mobster seem cool, in my opinion, right?
I think part of what you and I are getting at though is I'm totally fine if the show makes it seem like being a workaholic cook is extremely sexy and cool. That's I don't need all of my content, like what my media to tell me, hey, do you know this is bad? Like, we need to tell you it's bad. I don't need you to do that to me. The question that I think you and I are getting at is, does it have anything to say at all? It's fine if it endorses that, even in a toxic way.
Yeah.
But I'm not even sure the show, it seems like it's happening by accident as opposed to with purpose.
I agree completely with what you're saying. And I would say the most charitable way I would describe what the show is saying is that greatness comes with an intense series of trade-offs. Yeah. Right? That's the most charitable way I describe it. And that is very charitable in my opinion. I don't think the show is doing a good job of like saying that.
Right.
But like, but if I'm like looking at it and being like, okay, what's the best thing I can take away from this? It's like, hey, to be great, you need to be incredibly well balanced. It's extremely high skill level, and also it will cost you a lot, right? And maybe too much for some people. Like that's one way. But I don't know that the show is doing that effectively. But I could make the argument that that's what the show's trying to say.
Yeah.
And that's not a terrible. That is not uninteresting. But we'll see where the show ends up. So far, though, I feel a little bad because I think we've spent more time critiquing these first few episodes than we have praising them. At the same time, like, what is interesting is the reaction to the show has been universally beloved acclaim to the show. Like, it has like, I think 90+% on Rotten Tomatoes. People love the show. So when you tune into Decoding TV, you can get a different opinion on it. Basically,
my expectations are sky high, right? Like that's part of where this comes out of. Like, this is different than when I'm sitting down for like another Disney Plus Star Wars show. Like,
I don't remember you talking about Twisted Metal this way, Patrick Klepek.
Well, I mean, next season's going to have Calypso, so
yes, absolutely.
But
it's still an enjoyable show.
Yes,
it's still a breeze to get through. Oh, here's another positive thing I'll say about it is there has been a lot of criticism for the show in doing a binge release instead of releasing episodically. I still think that was a mistake to do that for season 2.
I agree.
Because we could have been talking about that show all summer last season if it had released episodically. However, releasing binge does allow you to do tone poem artistic exercises like episode 1 and get away with it in a way that you couldn't if you were releasing week to week. Imagine if they just dropped that episode 1 without the other episodes for this season.
Yeah.
That would be pretty irritating. In my opinion.
They could just do the Amazon approach, right? I feel like Amazon
you could do like the first 2 or 3, and then
if the first 3 episodes came out, then you're able to hand wave that away, like, because that is the show, like, using the form, like TV in its episodic form, like, should be an avenue for experimentation.
Like you tune in, you're like, oh wow, this is an episode that takes place entirely from the Ladybug's point of view. That was in the room.
Like that should be the beauty of the form, and we don't get enough of that, frankly. And so I'm with you that yes, that would have prompted some pretty negative responses. But I think there was a world where you could have your cake and eat it too. And I have profoundly disagreed with the all at one drop. Like, season 2 is just so rich episode to episode. Yeah. Like Copenhagen, fishes, forks, like just, I mean,
But the thing I think though is, like, the binge release does allow you to take more chances, in my opinion, because
I agree.
Because then it's like, oh, if the audience doesn't like that episode, guess what? There's another episode,
right?
A button click away. Doesn't, oh, you didn't like that one? Let's just move forward. Like, it doesn't, oh, that one didn't advance the narrative at all. Okay. The next episode is right in the queue.
Mm-hmm.
So this season did give me a deeper appreciation of that idea. But also part of it's probably that not much has happened yet. So I'm like, if they were releasing this week to week, I would like, imagine if we were having this conversation 3 weeks from now about the first 3 episodes, I'd be like, wow, not much has happened in the last 3 weeks of watching this show.
Yes, so, I agree.
So it does allow them to be more deliberate in terms of the pacing, but whether or not that's a good thing is up to you. Any other thoughts on the first 3 episodes of the show, Patrick Klepek?
I'm nervous. I get, unfortunately, it's confirming a lot of my worries about continuing the show at all past season 2 and not trying to find some way to arrive at a more meaningful conclusion, because it just seemed like an impossible high wire act to keep doing. Like, it did not seem like a show that had a 3 to 5 season run in it without profoundly shifting dynamics. I mean, like, I just didn't see how they were going to find enough. And that's it's okay. Not every show has to go on forever. And this show is going to get a lot of mileage out of just these people in a room bouncing. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot there to like, even if it feels a little empty calories by the time you're on the other side of the episode. But that's going to, even that will run its course eventually. So I'm hopeful. Like, this show, what I expect from the rest of the season is to be overall disappointed with the lack of narrative momentum. And yet my guess is there are going to be incredible highs like throughout the season that I'm like, well, okay, I wish more had happened, but like XYZ was worth this, the season. I expect that to be, that's my prediction on where I'm going to end up on this, is that the season as a whole is sort of kind of a wash, but it manages to hit incredible highs that make that journey worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Carmy-Richie relationship is really like, that's when I really started to get concerned, is because it's like, oh, this is like, we've already done this dynamic like over and over again.
Yeah,
like,
you're yelling at each other
repeatedly. Great. Yeah. And the thing is, I thought, it's going to last for like 3 minutes and then they're going to make up and then we're going to move forward from this point forward. But it's like, but when it kept going, I was like, you're really doubling down on this again. It's like, that's when I was like starting to be like, what is the show going to try to do this season? So yeah, I share your concern. And I feel like you that there will be some big highs, but I'm also very worried. But the other thing I'll just say is no other show is really doing this right now, right? No other show is really putting you into a kitchen of a high performing restaurant and like experiencing what that's like and the beauty and the agony of it. And there's a lot of ways the show does that effectively, just with its camera work, with its casting, with its with the way that set dressing is used and so on. And so it's worth checking out for that reason alone. But will it make a lot of movement? Will it push things forward? Patrick, something you said reminded me of another show we've talked about called Barry, the HBO original series. Something that Bill Hader said about Barry was one of the hardest things about that show. So for those who don't know, Barry is a show on HBO where Bill Hader plays a hitman who also decides to take acting lessons and get into acting. And Bill Hader said one of the hardest things about that show was figuring out a way to keep his main character alive. Right? Because the things that he does in the show basically make him marked for death. And so it's like, how do you keep this character alive? Like, it's so hard to keep this character alive after all these episodes. And one thing I can very positively say about Barry is they did not repeat the same beats over and over again. They took that show, arguably they went too far in the other direction. They went like...
but I prefer that, right?
Absolutely.
I had very mixed feelings about some of the creative choices in the back half of that final season, but...
It is ambitious.
It swings. There are swings, and it feels like the bear is a little in love with itself, and it's being a little too precious about the current dynamic.
I like it when Carmy and Richie fight and make up. I like it when Sid tries to hold Carmy back, and then it creates a fight, and then they make up. Like, like the people love those. The people making the show love those dynamics too much. But in the case of Barry, like that show is unrecognizable.
Yes,
in its final episodes from where it begins. Right.
Yes.
And whereas the bear right now is extremely recognizable, and the show needs to make a decision about where it wants to end up and what it wants to end up trying to do. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.